Hello, everybody, and welcome to Jack's Corner. I'm Tarzan Bonanno, and with me, as always, is our founder, Jack Figgle. This week, we're going back to meetings of famous people, his words again, not mine, this time with Patriarch Bartholomew. Sorry, man. But to begin, Jack, how are you doing?
Oh, very good. Tarzan, how are you?
I am well.
Good. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever. So where do you want to start?
So we're going to go back, let's see, almost 30 years.
30
Uh,
years.
30 years, yeah. The year was 1996, so that's actually 28 years ago.
Yep.
The month was April, so this,
Do you,
we're approaching around here in North America.
do you remember the
Uh,
day?
yeah, and it was a 2 week trip by my notes from my diaries, in which I went to Constantinople, Istanbul, for several reasons. But before we get to Istanbul, actually on the way, I flew into Athens and had a couple of days. That was my first trip to Greece, and flew to Athens and went around to various religious places, significant, especially in Athens itself. We didn't get out into the country or the Greek islands much. But we were going, or I was going, to meet up with the Kievan Church Study Group, which was a group that I think I mentioned before, was meeting back in the mid-90s, called together and sort of coordinated by Father Serge Kelleher, the editor of Eastern Church's Journal early on, and Archbishop Vsevolod, the co-patron of the Society of St. John Chrysostom and the Oriental Conferences, Metropolitan Kallistos, who I had met a year or two before, and Bishop Basil Austin, who is now retired Bishop Emeritus of Stamford, Connecticut. And they were organizing every 6 to 12 months these study groups that were a bilateral dialogue of Ukrainians, Catholics and Orthodox. And they were talking about, at an academic level, whether in fact the Church of Kiev ever split, because at the time of the excommunication of 1054, when Rome and Constantinople split, Kiev was in communion with both and never was really a party to those excommunications. And so they were trying to claim they did not need a reunification, they just needed to recognize the unity that has existed since the Union of Brest, and that therefore their dialogue was simply to talk about how we're common and how do we go about getting back into practical, visible communion, because there are no theological differences.
Yeah.
We're the same church. And I thought there was a lot of truth to that. Anyway, the Kievan Study Group, like I said, had been meeting every year or so. And at the time when I was starting to publish Eastern Church's Journal, I was invited to sort of be today we would use the pejorative term, hanger-on. I was sort of invited to take pictures and be around the group for non-meeting events, because the meetings were private. And so I was not allowed into the formal discussions. I was just there. I was their altar server. I took pictures, made reports into the journal of what I saw, and I went on various excursions and travel and so forth. Well, they were meeting in Constantinople on the island of Halki, which was where there was a monastery and a seminary in the 70s of the Orthodox that was closed by the Turks. And I accompanied them and went to Istanbul, stayed in the hotel. And on the last day of the uh, Kievan Church study meeting, they invited me out because they were having liturgy and they needed someone to serve at the altar. So I was the server. All of them were clergy, so they felt it was not quite their place to just act as an acolyte. Uh, but that's what I did, and so. What was interesting about it was here I was, a Greek Catholic, behind the iconostas, serving at the altar with several Ukrainian Orthodox and Callistos Greek Orthodox, the celebrants.
I mean, it sounds like, as you just what you said, why that study group began, because the theology is the same.
Yeah, so
Why?
it was kind of an exciting time for me to be meeting all these people, and then that same year we had finished a 2-year project of scanning and reprinting a clean version of the 1639 Liturgicon of Peter Mohila. And I think I've talked about that book project in the past. So we were presenting a white leather edition to the Patriarch that we had prepared as a special edition. And so I was invited to that private audience. So the private audience was Father Serge, Archbishop Vsevolod, Bishop Loston, and myself. And we met with the Patriarch in his office and presented the white leather edition in a nice big white box. So it was a real formal kind of a gift. But we also made 4 other copies of the same. A white box with a white leather edition with gold edged paper of the Mohila Služebnik. And the other copies were designated, one for the Pope, whenever we would have the chance to see him. I never did get to present it to him. I presented it to the Cardinal in charge of the ecumenical office, and they promised me that they would get it to him. The second copy was for Father Serge, who was the editor and the brains behind the whole idea. And then the other 2 went to the 2 Ukrainian hierarchs, Vsevolod and Basil, who were a part of that. So we made 5 of the books. Each of them, with the bookbindery, cost $500 for the book and the box. And so it was a bit of an expensive proposition, but having the chance to meet the Patriarch and give it to him seemed like it was worth it to me. So from Athens, I flew to Istanbul, spent a couple of days getting to know the city because it was my first time there. And then on Tuesday, April 16th, was the date of our audience. I remember the Patriarch's office, what's called the Fanar, was somewhat, to be polite, disorganized. We did not have a specific appointment time. It was sort of like, yeah, the Patriarch will see you on Tuesday. So the idea was you showed up at 9 in the morning and you waited until you were called. And in those early years, sometimes I was called in with whoever I was with at 10. Sometimes it was 1. Sometimes it was even 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you had to wait around that whole time until the Patriarch was ready to see you. I don't think we had to wait very long because we had 2 hierarchs, and it was just going to be a pleasant visit with the gift. And so it was nothing controversial or consequential that he had to prepare for. It was just he had to, sort of be there and be available for us to chat and explain what we were doing and who Peter Mohila was. I'm sure he knew who that was, but the details about the book and what we were presenting to him. I have pictures that makes me remember the event better. And of course, each of us got a picture with the patriarch holding the book, including myself. And then the patriarch, we left all 5 copies with someone. We took one in and then took all 5 copies with us. And then after our audience, we asked someone on the staff if the patriarch could sign all of them for us. And so I'm very blessed to have a white leather edition of the Peter Mohilas Služebnik Liturgicon that I made in 1996, sitting on my bookcase with an inscription of Bartholomew. And then I asked, I think Callistos, because the patriarch's handwriting is very elaborate to begin with. And of course, it's all in Greek. And so I asked Callistos, and so I have a small business card in the book that has printed in English what it says.
That's nice.
And basically something to the effect, to the servant of God, Jack Fiegel, with prayers and blessings, Bartholomew, Constantinople, April 16th, 1996. So it's kind of cool to have that book on the shelf as a remembrance. That's going to be one of the books that is left in my will to the seminary library in Pittsburgh, where all of my special signed editions and a complete collection of all my publications are going to be left to their library, and they've agreed to put on a special bookcase of Jack Fiegel editions and these special signature editions that are going to be, I think perhaps somewhat valuable by that time, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, depending on how many years the good Lord allows me to stay in this life before the next.
Fair. And also, it has both of their. Was it, when you say printed, did he like write it out with his handwriting, Callistos?
Yes.
Or yeah, so you have both of their handwritings in that book.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Both of them. It's triply valuable after that moment.
And I actually have somewhere in the files a couple of Callistos's papers from Oriental Illumin, because he did not own a computer or a typewriter. And it's interesting to realize that he wrote all of his books by longhand. Yeah. And then had someone type them up. And so his speeches or his lectures at the Oriental Illumin conferences, he had longhand written up notes that he left me to use to make the proceedings. The first 10 years of Oriental Illumin, we did published proceedings books, and in order to get his paper in, I needed a manuscript. And so I literally have a handwritten manuscript in his handwriting.
Which then also means every time we have a Callistos lecture series on the podcast, those notes in his hand, because I can see the visual when I'm editing it, they're all handwritten.
Yes. Oh, yes. Now, many times those notes are exactly that, notes. It's not a manuscript, because he reorganizes and reshuffles, and I've been there preparing for some of those recordings where he's still on his kitchen table sorting through the pieces of paper into a certain series and putting some into the folder they came from. Namely, he's not going to talk about that, or it goes into what he's gathering to be his notes, and then he talks from those notes, shuffling the papers as he goes. When I asked him about getting a manuscript, he said, all he has is notes that he talks from. And there are actually a few videos that he had no notes, that he just talked.
Haven't yet seen those, so.
Yeah, yeah. You'll get to them. The one that I remember most distinctly was Churches of the Christian East, which was uh, him giving an oral summary on video of his book, The Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm.
And all I did was present to him the outline of the chapters, and he took each chapter heading and sat and spoke for 45 minutes.
Well, okay then.
So,
Back to
uh,
1996.
yeah, back to 1996. After the audience, we had lunch with the patriarch, which was kind of exciting to have the opportunity to be with him for that period of time. And then in the evening, I had dinner with Archbishop Seblood, Bishop Lawston, and Father Serge. Uh, I then stayed a couple more days while the Kievan study group was meeting out on Honky and toured around. But one of the persons I met in the Fanar, the offices, was a Deacon Tarasios. And he was the Grand Archdeacon of the Patriarch at the time, which meant he was in charge of all the liturgical ceremonies and sort of was the senior deacon of all the deacons that worked at the Fanar. And he was having computer problems at his desk. And having, studied and spent a lot of my time with computers, I sat down and was able to work out how to fix it. And he was so grateful they didn't have to call in a repair person or some software expert. He invited me out for dinner that week. So I also had dinner with the Grand Archdeacon, who 5 years later became Metropolitan of Buenos Aires. And now I believe he's Metropolitan in title, but that he's in residence at the Athenagoras Orthodox Institute at Berkeley University in California. But anyway, I first met him almost 30 years ago, and he was the archdeacon. And I fixed his computer, and he took me out for dinner. And being the first time in Istanbul, being taken out for dinner, that was another exciting part of the trip. When I went out to Honky, I served for the liturgy, had lunch with the group, took pictures, and then came back. I didn't stay overnight. I stayed in the hotel near Taksim Square that we were using as sort of a base of operations. So I was there for a whole week, got out to see a few things, and we had the audience. But most of the time, I just spent in my hotel room without a whole lot to do because all the action was elsewhere. So I remember that it was almost a mini vacation at the beach rather than with lots and lots of things to do and go see. Another of the days after the Halki meeting was finished was that we took a small minibus tour because the Kievan study group was about 8 or 10 people. We took a small minibus tour of the main sites of Constantinople, and that was on Saturday the 20th. And of course, we saw the highlights of Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque at the Hippodrome, and things like the Grand Bazaar, a covered mall in the Turkish sense, where all these shops, little 10 by 10 square foot areas, and there's like 1,000 of them under one roof. The biggest shopping mall you can imagine. But at the crossroads of east and west and north and south, and split between two continents, so it's a heavily traveled trade route. On Sunday the 21st, after all of these things, we were invited and attended the liturgy on Sunday with the Patriarch, but it was not him serving. It's one of the shortcomings and issues of him staying in Istanbul. The Turks do not allow the patriarch to celebrate liturgy every week. He is only allowed to celebrate the liturgy on special occasions, special feast days, and that's a way in which they feel that they control him, because the Turks don't recognize him as a world leader, as ecumenical patriarch. He's simply the Bishop of Istanbul.
Mm.
And in order to prove their point, they restrict him from serving liturgy very often. Mostly he presides from the throne that's in the middle of the church off to the side. But what's interesting about the throne is, even though the church is more recent, the throne survives from the days of St. John Chrysostom. It was the throne that Chrysostom used when he was patriarch and Archbishop of Constantinople in
Which
the
is
4th
a
century.
very long time.
Back in the 4th century. That's right. So
I'm literally the reason why that even like popped into my head like that is because right now one of the things I'm reading is the history of the Catholic Church from apostolic age to the 3rd millennium, and the way the book is broken down is it's in 500-year chunks, and then every single topic that happened within it. So it's like, here's this from the year 33 to the year 500, rather than like a linear timeline. And so I'm reading it, and I'm continuously seeing Chrysostom years 400 to whenever he died, and like, so you're like, from the years of when Chrysostom was still over Constantinople. I'm like, it's not even 5 chapters into my book. That's how long it was.
That's right. It's one of the earlier chapters is when he lived.
Yeah.
It gives you, yeah. Well, hopefully, Tarzan, one of these days you'll have the opportunity to get to Istanbul, and you can see those places and see that throne, because I'm sure they're gonna keep it a while. But yeah, the first time I saw it and was told what it was, and realized, my goodness, that's been here 1700 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still in use.
Yeah.
That's where he presides the liturgy, and he also presides on a fairly regular basis the daily office that takes place in the Cathedral of St. George. So he will turn up for Vespers on a regular basis, and when he does, there are, in the Greek usage of Vespers, there are a place where the ecclesiarch, or the head hierarch of the place at the time, has a solo of chanting the Stichira, or I think it's mostly the Stichira, it's Psalm 140. But it's interesting. He's got a very, very good baritone singing voice. I don't know the Greek chant like I know the Ruthenian chant, but he seems to sing it well, and it's always a great pleasure to be there. It seems like it is, the propers or the changeable parts or the psalms. He may recite and chant the psalms, but what's also curious to note, when he does that, he does not bring his own book in. There's a book there prepared for him by the deacon, and all he has to do is turn to the side. The deacon has the book open to the page that he's supposed to be on, and points on the page of what he's supposed to be chanting. So he doesn't have to read the Typicon to see what he's supposed to take, what he's supposed to pray. Someone prepares it for him. So our trip concluded with that liturgy with the Patriarch on Sunday the 21st. And then I think Monday or Tuesday flew back to Washington after that week in Istanbul. So it was it was an exciting trip for me, being the first time in Istanbul, first time to meet the Patriarch, um, and to have the presentation of the special white leather book that I have sitting on my shelf, and every time I walk by, it reminds me of that experience. So it stays very present in my life, and was a special event. So that's the first of many. Our next few weeks, I will attempt to joggle my memory banks for other encounters with the ecumenical patriarch. And it's actually going to be fun in preparing to sit down and count them. I think the number is over 20, but I'm not sure exactly how many. And I'm going to go through my diaries from year to year and make notes of when I was in Istanbul to meet him. I've met him outside of Istanbul twice. No, sorry, 3 times. And so we'll certainly tell those stories as well. When he's been on pastoral visits to the States, I've had the opportunity to be invited and to meet him in person outside of Istanbul. So those stories are the ones that are coming over the next few weeks, and look forward to sharing them with everybody. So have a good week and continued blessed Lent.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, seeing that clearly concludes this episode, thank you all for coming to this episode of Jack's Corner. Thank you, Jack, for sharing this story. It's nice to know what you were doing the days that I was coming home from the hospital as an infant. My birthday's April 12th, and that's the year I was born.
Well, then you and my nephew have a lot in common, because he was born that same week as well.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. God bless and goodbye.